The conference room smelled of stale coffee and polished wood. Marissa Ellis adjusted her blazer, fingertips brushing the edge of her leather portfolio, her pulse thrumming louder than the fluorescent hum above. Across the long oak table, Captain Daniel Reed leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth curling into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "You know, Ms. Ellis," Reed said, tapping a shiny badge with one finger, "sometimes people like you, overqualified, too polished, just overstep." His gaze lingered, deliberate, heavy. Marissa's jaw tightened. She had walked into this meeting expecting scrutiny, but not this veiled contempt wrapped in false civility. "I'm here to discuss the audit," she said, her voice steady, though her stomach nodded. "Let's stick to the facts." He chuckled, leaning forward. "Facts are one thing. Fit is another. You're impressive, yes, but sometimes impressive is dangerous." A bead of sweat traced her temple. She felt the weight of every eye in the room, mostly silent colleagues, some avoiding her gaze, all complicit. The city's latest scandal had drawn her in, and yet here she was, reduced to a cautionary example in Reed's mind. The ambitious black woman daring to measure power she hadn't earned in his world. "Overqualified," he said again, slower this time, like a verdict. The word stung, sharp in public, a hidden slap. Marissa's fingers curled around the portfolio, nails pressing into the leather. She wanted to explode, to name the bias hanging in the air, but she knew better. She had seen what could happen to women like her, ambitious, black, and alone. Then Reed's phone buzzed. He glanced down, smirk fading. The screen glowed, and in that instant, Marissa realized the meeting was about to spiral far beyond his control, and hers. Her gut clenched. Something irreversible was coming. The polished glass doors of the city police headquarters reflected Marissa Ellis's determined expression back at her as she stepped inside. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floor, a metronome to the rhythm of her thoughts. Every visit carried the same undercurrent, a mix of scrutiny, expectation, and the silent threat of resistance from men who were convinced that power belonged to them. Today's agenda was simple, in theory, an audit of internal complaints, specifically allegations of misconduct quietly mounting over the past 6 months. But the room itself had a way of making ordinary tasks feel like warfare. Captain Daniel Reed was waiting in the conference room, arms crossed, badge catching the fluorescent light. He exuded authority, every line of his body taut with control. His eyes scanned her, calculating, measuring, predatory in their precision. Marissa offered a brief, measured nod, sliding into the chair across from him. "Ms. Ellis," he said, voice smooth, almost ingratiating. "The department appreciates transparency. We like to cooperate." His smile didn't reach his eyes, though sometimes cooperation is a matter of perspective. Marissa opened her leather portfolio, the familiar weight grounding her. "I'm here to review the files, Captain. Let's focus on what the complaints actually say." He leaned back, chair creaking under him. "Of course. But you must understand you're, how should I put this, overqualified for some of these roles." He let the word linger, a verdict disguised as observation. "People see ambition, Ms. Ellis, and sometimes they don't respond well." Her jaw tightened. "Ambition is not a crime," she said, voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Accuracy is." Reed chuckled, a short, sharp sound. "You're impressive." "Yes. Dangerous, maybe. Do be careful." Marissa's eyes flicked to the other officers in the room. Some stiffened, others avoided her gaze. She could feel the unspoken alliances forming against her. Overqualified wasn't just about skill. It was about boundaries, about race, about who decided who belonged. "Let's start with the first file," Marissa said, opening her portfolio deliberately, fingers brushing the smooth paper. Reed's smirk faded into something unreadable, eyes narrowing. "Ms. Ellis," he said softly, almost a whisper, "just remember, ambition doesn't always get rewarded here." The words hung in the air like a threat. Marissa felt her fingers tighten around the edge of the table, heart thudding. She had prepared for scrutiny, for condescension, but not this quiet, chilling dismissal of her authority. She knew better than to respond with anger. Her professionalism was her shield. She flipped the first page, scanning the reports. Complaints dismissed without investigation. Officers shielded with vague language. Disciplinary actions never fully carried out. Each line whispered the same story. Systemic favoritism. Protection of the powerful. The invisible barrier she had expected but now saw with stark clarity. Then Reed's phone buzzed on the polished wood. He glanced down, a flicker of unease crossing his face. The screen glowed with an incoming city board alert. Marissa's instincts pricked. Something had shifted. The equilibrium in the room had cracked. Her gaze lifted, steady. "Captain?" He didn't answer. He stared at the phone, caught between annoyance and dread, as though realizing that the very world he controlled was narrower than he had imagined. The air thickened, tension crackling like static. Marissa felt the first stirrings of something profound, a chance not just to observe injustice, but to confront it. She exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch. Every micro-expression, every pause in the room, told her more than words ever could. Reed's smirk had faltered, and for the first time, she glimpsed a vulnerability beneath the armor of authority. Marissa knew the meeting would not end with mere words. This was the first move in a battle she hadn't asked for, but could not ignore. And somewhere in the quiet, she felt the first crack forming in Reed's confidence, a fissure she would follow, carefully, deliberately, to the truth. The fluorescent lights of the department's records room cast a sterile glare over the endless rows of filing cabinets. Marissa Ellis moved between them with deliberate precision, pulling out folders, sliding them across the metal table with careful hands. Each file represented complaint, a human voice silenced by bureaucracy, dusted over with euphemisms like employee incident report or behavioral anomaly. She opened the first one. Officer R. Thompson, accused of excessive force during a traffic stop. The report had been buried under 2 other cases, dismissed with the excuse of lack of corroborating evidence. Marissa frowned. Her pen hovered over the margin. She had seen this before. A pattern, almost ritualistic in its repetition. A shadow fell over the table. Reed leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Digging through history, Ms. Ellis?" His tone was casual, but the underlying edge made her spine stiffen. "I'm reviewing patterns," she said without looking up. "These complaints aren't isolated. There's a systemic issue here." He chuckled softly. "Systemic, huh? You sound like you've been reading too many reports." "Sometimes what you see isn't reality, it's perception." Marissa's eyes met his. "Or maybe reality is just inconvenient for some people." He shrugged, letting the words hang. "Watch your tone, Miss Ellis. Perception is everything in this line of work. People talk, rumors fly, and you're already noticeable." The word noticeable landed heavier than any accusation. She opened the next file. Officer L. Herrera, multiple complaints for harassment that had been quietly dropped after sensitivity training. Marissa traced her finger along the pages, each signature a silent concession to a system that valued loyalty over justice. A young officer peeked around the corner. "Captain." She's in the records room again. Reed's jaw tightened. "Let her work." He glanced at Marissa with a forced casualness, masking something sharper beneath. "Just careful where you point your finger." Marissa didn't flinch. "I'm documenting everything, Captain. Transparency isn't optional." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know you're ambitious, smart, but remember, there's a line. You don't want to cross it." She felt the tension in the air, the invisible walls closing in. "Cross it?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Captain, I'm not crossing anything. I'm holding people accountable. That's my job." He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "It'll feel different when the consequences are real." Marissa returned to her files, determined not to be distracted. She noticed patterns that spoke louder than any conversation. Complaints dismissed by the same officers over and over, language that softened blame, reports flagged as sensitive then buried. One folder, in particular, stood out, a concealed file labeled Executive Exceptions. She flipped it open cautiously. Inside were emails, notes, and internal memos that hinted at preferential treatment for certain officers, with Reed's initials on multiple pages. Her pulse quickened. The file wasn't just a record of misconduct. It was a map of systemic protection, coded in bureaucratic euphemisms and thinly veiled endorsements. She felt a spark of indication, but also the weight of responsibility. If this evidence fell into the wrong hands, the repercussions could be catastrophic. Reed's voice broke her concentration. "Find anything interesting, Miss Ellis?" She looked up slowly, placing the file down. "Patterns," she said carefully. "Favoritism, dismissals, selective accountability. And your fingerprints are all over it." He stiffened, eyes narrowing. "Careful with your accusations. That's a serious claim." "It's not an accusation," she replied, voice firm. "It's a documented observation, and the city deserves to see it." Reed exhaled sharply, tension visible now, his smirk gone. "You think this will be easy? That everyone will just listen?" "I don't expect easy," Marissa said. "I expect justice." The young officer from earlier hovered nervously. Marissa noticed him glance at Reed, then back at her, a silent calculation in his eyes. The room seemed smaller, claustrophobic with unspoken hierarchies and alliances. She was a single person standing against a carefully constructed network of protection, privilege, and prejudice. Flipping through the executive exceptions folder again, Marissa's eyes widened. There were memos detailing internal investigations she hadn't yet seen, notes on officers with repeated complaints, and recommendations buried by Reed himself. Every line was a thread, leading to a web of complicity. Her phone buzzed quietly, an anonymous tip. She hesitated, then opened it. A short message, almost cryptic, but clear enough. "Look deeper. He's hiding more than you know. Check the last folder in row 7. Reed's voice cut through again. "Working late, Miss Ellis?" His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp. Marissa closed the folder, straightening in her chair. "I work until the truth is found, Captain, and I don't plan on stopping any time soon." He stepped back, expression guarded. "Ambition, dangerous. Just remember the lines you're crossing." She ignored him, her mind already racing to the files, the patterns, the evidence she would need to expose the injustice. The night stretched ahead, fluorescent lights flickering, papers scattered, and the quiet hum of department unaware of the reckoning slowly approaching. And somewhere in the shadow of authority, Reed realized the balance of power might be shifting, though he didn't yet understand how much he had underestimated her. Marissa Ellis stood behind the plexiglass podium in the City Hall's press room, the low murmur of reporters filling the air like static. Cameras clicked, microphones swiveled, and the scent of coffee mingled with the faint chemical tang of electronics. Her fingers gripped the edges of the podium, leather portfolio tucked under one arm. She had rehearsed every line, anticipated every question, but the weight of the room made it feel as though she were stepping onto a tightrope stretched over a pit of suspicion and prejudice. "Ms. Ellis, can you explain why this audit seems to target certain officers more than others?" a reporter asked, voice clipped, almost accusatory. Marissa lifted her gaze, calm but piercing. "The audit targets patterns of misconduct, not individuals. Our goal is to ensure accountability and transparency across the department, regardless of rank or tenure." From the side, Captain Daniel Reed watched her with a calculated expression, arms crossed, his lips pressing into a thin line. He had managed to spin her competence as arrogance before, but here, under the scrutiny of the media, he looked almost offensive. "You're saying no officer is above reproach?" Another reporter pressed, leaning forward. "Correct," Marissa said, steady. "No officer. Not rank. Not favoritism. Not bias. Justice must apply equally to all." A subtle murmur ran through the room. Cameras shifted. Reed's jaw tightened. He had attempted to control the narrative before, but the story was no longer his to frame. After the press conference, she retreated to a quiet hallway. A reporter approached her, notebook in hand. "Ms. Ellis, some critics are saying your audit is politically motivated. How do you respond?" Marissa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Critics can say what they want. Facts are immutable. I didn't come here to please anyone. I came here to reveal the truth." She walked past a wall of portraits depicting former police chiefs, their solemn gazes almost accusatory. In each frame, she saw a legacy of authority cloaked in silence, protection, and compromise. Her own reflection shimmered faintly on the glass, a black woman daring to measure the powers that had long gone unchecked. Reed appeared beside her, voice deceptively casual. Interesting choice of words, Ms. Ellis. Truth is sometimes inconvenient, sometimes dangerous. Marissa met his gaze without flinching. Truth is never dangerous. Only hiding it is. He smiled thinly. Be careful how loudly you speak, then. People notice. People talk. She walked past him, ignoring the warning, and entered the elevator. Her phone vibrated. A text from a journalist. The board wants more details. They're impressed with your clarity. Don't let him intimidate you. Her chest tightened. Every step she took seemed to echo in the polished steel walls, a metronome marking both her determination and the vigilance required to navigate a system that resisted change at every level. Later that afternoon, she returned to the department to continue the audit. Reed intercepted her in the hallway. The public likes a spectacle, he said smoothly. And you? Well, you thrive on it, don't you? I thrive on facts, Marissa replied evenly. On accountability, not your approval. He smirked, shifting his weight. Approval isn't the issue. Survival is. Some people here, they won't like the spotlight you're shining. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I'm aware, but if we don't shine it, who will? Inside her office, she spread out the files again, reviewing complaints and emails. Patterns were now more visible than ever, amplified by the public scrutiny she had brought to the audit. Officers who had hidden behind bureaucratic euphemisms now appeared transparent in their negligence. Favoritism, dismissals, protection of the privileged, it all hung like evidence in the stark, fluorescent light. The phone rang. Reed's name flashed across the screen. She let it ring, let him stew. She knew he wanted control, to intimidate, but she had learned that her voice, measured, factual, relentless, was her most powerful weapon. Later that evening, the news cycles caught fire. Clips of her press briefings circulated online. Her poise, her authority, her refusal to be diminished. Comments poured in support, doubt, criticism, outrage. But through it all, one thing became clear. Marissa had shifted the narrative. The public was watching now. And Reed, for the first time in his carefully maintained career, realized the spotlight could burn him. Marissa closed the office door, exhaling slowly. Every headline, every clip, every whispered conversation in the halls of power reminded her of the stakes. She had made herself visible, vulnerable, but she had also made the injustice undeniable. The files lay open before her, scattered like evidence of both wrongdoing and courage. Somewhere in the city, Reed plotted his next move, unaware that with each attempt to suppress her work, he only strengthened her resolve. She stared at the patterns on the pages. The truth was now out in the open. The public eye had begun to turn, and once it saw, it would not look away. The office hallway was dimly lit. The hum of the ventilation system, the only sound as Marissa Ellis made her way to the captain's office. Every step echoed in the polished floor, a reminder of the scrutiny she endured with each visit. Today, Rhea called her in for a private discussion, a phrase that immediately set her nerves on edge. She had anticipated confrontation, but her instincts told her this encounter would be different, more calculated, more dangerous. Reed was seated behind his massive oak desk, the blinds drawn halfway, casting sharp lines across his uniform. He gestured to the chair opposite him with a faintly patronizing smile. "Please," he said smoothly. "Sit." Marissa remained standing for a moment, the leather portfolio clutched to her chest. "I assume this is about the audit?" she asked, voice steady but edged. "Indirectly," Reed said, leaning back. "I wanted to speak privately, away from prying eyes. You've made quite an impression, Ms. Ellis. Bold, ambitious, perhaps a little overzealous." "Ambition is not a flaw, Captain," she replied, "nor is diligence." He smiled, a thin, sharp line. "Diligence is commendable, yes, but boldness in the wrong direction can be disruptive. You're new to policing, yet here you are, auditing the department, pointing out flaws, questioning authority. Do you understand the consequences?" Marissa's jaw tightened. "I understand accountability. If your officers fail the public, The consequences fall on leadership. That's why I'm here. Reed's eyes flickered, a subtle shift that betrayed his irritation. Leadership, authority, they are earned, Ms. Ellis, not just assumed. And sometimes people misinterpret intent. They see critique as defiance. She placed the portfolio on the desk, opening it deliberately. These are not critiques. They are documented patterns. Dismissals, favoritism, selective investigations, every line is evidence. Authority without accountability is what undermines trust. He leaned forward, hands clasped. You talk about accountability as if it's universal, objective. But in this department, context matters. History matters. Hierarchy matters. You may have facts, but facts alone don't dictate outcome. People do. I'm aware of context, Captain, she said evenly, which is why I'm documenting everything. Your role, the officer's decisions, the dismissed complaints, all of it. Transparency doesn't respect titles or rank. Reed's lips pressed into a tight line. He shifted in his chair, hands tapping the desk. You think you understand this world, Ms. Ellis, but policing isn't just a system. It's culture, and culture doesn't change overnight. People resist. People protect their own, including me. And that's exactly why the audit is necessary, she countered. Because when protection overrides accountability, justice is compromised. Citizens are harmed. Careers are at risk. Trust is lost. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Careful, Ms. Ellis. Bold words can provoke retaliation. Not everyone appreciates transparency. I'm not here to be appreciated, she said, voice firm. I'm here to uphold the law. Reed leaned back, exhaling slowly. The room seemed smaller now, the blinds casting shadows that mirrored his simmering unease. You've got documents, reports, emails, he said, voice dropping. You've done your homework. But do you understand what you're stepping into? This is an academic exercise. It's a career battlefield. Marissa's eyes met his. I understand more than you think. And I also understand that hiding misconduct, bearing complaints, protecting certain officers, that's the battlefield you created. I'm just pointing it out. The tension thickened, the kind that made every exhale deliberate. Reed's gaze sharpened, and for a fleeting moment, his massive control slipped. Marissa noticed it, filing away mentally, the way his hand trembled slightly on the desk, the subtle shift in his posture. He cleared his throat, voice regaining composure. You have allies, Ms. Ellis, people who support your work. But you also have enemies, people who will see your persistence as a threat. Let them, she said softly. I didn't come here to make friends. He leaned forward, voice lower, almost a whisper now. Ambition can be dangerous, Ms. Ellis. Sometimes it costs more than you expect. Marissa's pulse quickened. She knew exactly what he meant, and yet she refused to flinch. I'm willing to pay the price for justice. Are you willing to face the consequences of your choices, Captain? Reed's eyes narrowed, jaw tightening. His control felt suddenly fragile, threatened by a reality he hadn't anticipated. We'll see, he said, tone clipped, standing. We'll see who holds the authority when the dust settles. Marissa gathered her portfolio, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. Just remember, Captain, authority isn't given. It's earned. And when it's unearned, it crumbles. She walked out of the office, heels clicking sharply against the tile. Behind her, Reed sank into his chair, staring at the portfolio she had left behind, the weight of her words pressing against his carefully constructed image of control. Outside, the city's hum continued, unaware of the quiet battle unfolding within the walls of power. Marissa returned to her files with renewed focus, knowing the road ahead would be treacherous, but also certain that each documented pattern, each recorded dismissal, was another step toward exposing the truth. And somewhere deep in the shadows of authority, Reed realized that for the first time, his unearned power might not survive scrutiny. Marissa Ellis sat in the corner of a quiet cafe, the hum of conversation around her a soft counterpoint to the storm in her mind. Her laptop glowed with the audit files, each spreadsheet and report thread connecting misconduct, favoritism, and hidden approvals. She sipped her coffee carefully, aware that even a casual gesture here could be observed, judged, or misinterpreted. Across the table, her contact from the city oversight board, Julia Hammond, tapped her pen nervously. "You're really taking on Reed?" Julia asked, voice low. "He's formidable. Some people say he's untouchable." Marissa looked up, calm but resolute. "No one is untouchable, Julia. Not when the evidence is clear, documented, and undeniable. He may have influence, but influence doesn't erase misconduct." Julia exhaled, leaning back. "I know, but he's smart, manipulative. People in the department. Some will go to great lengths to protect him, even if it means sabotaging you." "I'm aware," Marissa replied. "That's why I need your help. Not just the board authority, but the people willing to support transparency, even quietly." Julia nodded, sliding a folder across the table. "Here are internal memos, some emails that corroborate your observations. You're not imagining patterns. Reed has been shielding certain officers for years." Marissa picked up the papers, scanning quickly. Each document felt like a piece of a puzzle finally falling into place. Favoritism, dismissals, coded language. Every thread pointing back to the captain. She felt a surge of resolve and a familiar pang of isolation. Allies were few. Adversaries were everywhere. "You need to be careful," Julia warned, eyes scanning the cafe as though Reed could appear in any doorway. "Some colleagues will resist your work quietly. Others may actively undermine you. Don't underestimate the subtle forms of retaliation." Marissa's lips pressed into a line. "I've seen it already. Dismissive comments, avoidance, passive-aggressive warnings. I expected resistance. I just didn't expect it to be so blatant." Julia offered a small, sympathetic smile. "You're not alone. There are people watching. People who care. But you'll need to navigate carefully. Sometimes silence is a shield." Marissa's mind drifted back to the department. Officers who had once nodded politely now avoided her gaze. Emails she sent were met with delayed responses or misdirection. Subtle hostility lingered like a shadow over every corridor. The system wasn't overtly hostile. It was quietly insidious, a lattice of protection and fear that kept misconduct hidden. Her phone buzzed. A colleague from the department texted, "Meet me after hours. I have information that could help." She exhaled, tension rising. Allies were cautious, but present. Even a single voice in her corner could tip the balance. She typed back, "Understood. I'll be there." Later that evening, she met Officer Malik Thompson in a deserted parking garage. The dim light glinted off the concrete, casting long shadows. Malik's posture was tense, hands shoved into pockets. "You're asking a lot, Marissa," he said quietly. "People have been protecting Reed for years. If he finds out you're digging deeper, it won't just be your career at risk." "I know," she said, voice firm. "But hiding the truth doesn't protect anyone. Not the public. Not the officers. Not even him." He hesitated, then slid a USB drive across the hood of his car. "These are emails," internal notes. "Reed's name's on all of them. But be careful. Some of these guys play dirty." Marissa picked it up, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down. "Thank you. This helps more than you know." Malik's eyes flicked nervously toward the shadows. "I'm serious. Some people will come after you, and they won't make it obvious. Watch the quiet ones." "I will," she said, tucking the drive into her portfolio. "But I can't stop. Not now." Back in her office, Marissa spread out the new files alongside her original audit materials. Patterns solidified into a web of protection, concealment, and favoritism. Reed was not just an obstacle. He was a node at the center of a network designed to resist accountability. The phone rang again. Julia's voice came through, low and urgent. "Marissa, I've just received word that some members of the board are nervous. Reed's influence runs deeper than we realized. He's quietly lobbying to delay your findings." Marissa exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Let him lobby. The truth isn't negotiable. We have the documentation. We have the proof. And we're not stopping." Julia paused. "I just hope you're prepared for what comes next. Some allies will help. Others will quietly obstruct you. The department's culture is thick with loyalty to Reed, not the law. I'm aware, Marissa said. Her voice carried the quiet steel she had cultivated over years of preparation. But this isn't about loyalty. It's about justice. She hung up and leaned back, eyes scanning the wall of files before her. Allies were scarce, cautious, and vulnerable, but they existed. Adversaries were numerous, hidden in plain sight. Every conversation, every document, every whispered warning added weight to the choices she had made. Marissa knew one thing with absolute clarity. To challenge a system built on protection and bias, she would need to rely on the people willing to risk themselves and on her own relentless resolve. And somewhere in the department, Reed was already aware that the tide might be turning. His allies were fewer than he believed, and Marissa's determination was stronger than he had anticipated. The quiet war had begun. The city oversight boardroom smelled of polished wood and tension. Marissa Ellis entered, portfolio in hand, scanning the long table where board members were already seated, papers and tablets spread in meticulous order. She felt every eye measure her as she took a seat, sensing their unspoken judgments. Outside the tall glass windows, the city buzzed with indifferent energy, unaware that its guardians were now on trial. Captain Daniel Reed was already there, seated at the far end. He exuded calm authority, but Marissa could sense the tautness in his posture, the subtle narrowing of his eyes whenever she met his gaze. He had arrived prepared, his expression carefully neutral, yet every micro-gesture screamed caution. Marissa opened her portfolio. "Thank you for allowing me to present my findings," she said, voice calm but firm. "The audit reveals patterns of misconduct, favoritism, and selective accountability that compromise the integrity of the department. Each complaint I reviewed, dismissed or delayed, follows a pattern tied to internal protection networks." A board member leaned forward. "You're suggesting the captain himself is complicit?" "I'm suggesting that patterns implicate leadership, yes," Marissa said evenly. "And evidence shows repeated interference in investigations, selective enforcement, and protection of certain officers." Reed shifted, voice smooth, almost casual. "I must object," he said, turning to the board. "These findings are theoretical at best. They rely on interpretation, not fact. Ms. Ellis's audit, while detailed, risks politicizing personnel decisions. We cannot judge on assumptions." Marissa met his eyes steadily. "These are not assumptions. They are documented facts, emails, memos, internal communications. Each piece corroborates the other. The pattern is undeniable." A second board member spoke, hesitantly. "Captain, we understand your concern, but this evidence, if verified, cannot be dismissed lightly." Reed leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Verification requires nuance. Some complaints are subjective, perception-driven. Audits cannot replace judgment or experience." Marissa's jaw tightened. Judgment without accountability is abuse. Experience without oversight is privilege. The public expects and deserves both. A tense silence fell. Cameras in the back recorded the exchange, and she could feel the weight of every officer and staffer who would someday watch this footage. Every word mattered. Every pause was scrutinized. "You underestimate the impact of your claims, Ms. Ellis," Reed said, voice low, dangerous. "Some officers may feel targeted. Morale could be affected. Careers could be damaged. People trust me to lead them wisely. And people deserve leaders who are accountable," Marissa replied, unwavering. "Trust is earned, not assumed. And when leadership shields misconduct, it erodes every relationship, every protocol, every citizen's safety." Board members exchanged glances. One whispered to another, eyes flicking toward the documents laid out before Marissa. Reed's facade of control began to crack. He could sense it. Patterns that had long been hidden were now meticulously traced, illuminated by her calm, relentless professionalism. "Ms. Ellis," Reed said finally, his tone clipped, "you are challenging not just me, but the entire department. Are you prepared for the consequences if any of this is inaccurate?" "I am prepared for truth," she said firmly. "And the truth cannot be inaccurate. Every email, every memo, every report I submitted has been verified and cross-referenced." He leaned forward, eyes hard. You make it sound simple. But systems like this, they resist change. They resist exposure. People in power, your allies included, can only protect you so long. Are you confident in their loyalty? Marissa allowed herself a small smile. I trust those who act with integrity, and I act with evidence. That's all the loyalty required. Reed's hand brushed against his coffee cup, betraying a slight tremor. He hadn't expected her to remain unflinching under pressure, unbowed by the implied threat of political or career retaliation. A board member cleared her throat. Captain Reed, while we recognize your concerns, the documentation Ms. Ellis has provided demands an independent review. We will not ignore patterns that suggest repeated interference. Your cooperation will be necessary. Reed's gaze flicked to Marissa, thinly veiled frustration flashing across his features. I see, he said evenly, though his tone lacked conviction. Very well. We'll proceed as you recommend. Marissa exhaled softly, but the tension didn't lift. This was a small victory in a much larger battle. She had presented her findings, exposed systemic bias, and forced the leadership to acknowledge scrutiny. But Reed's power still loomed, and resistance would come in subtler, more dangerous forms. After the board adjourned, Marissa lingered to collect her documents. Julia Hammond approached quietly. They're taking it seriously, Julia said, voice low. But Reed is furious. You've rattled him more than anyone anticipated. I expected that, Marissa said, tucking the files into her portfolio. It's not about rattling him. It's about ensuring accountability. And that requires exposing uncomfortable truths. Julia nodded. Be careful. Some of his allies will be watching your every move, waiting for a misstep. He doesn't lose easily. I know, Marissa replied, and I won't give him the opportunity. Later that night, back at her apartment, she reviewed the day's events. The boardroom confrontation had been a public test of wills, and she had passed. But the flicker of unease in Reed's eyes reminded her that this fight was far from over. She spread the documents on her desk, meticulously cataloging emails, memos, and internal notes. Each thread connected to a larger network of concealment. Each thread brought her closer to exposing not just Reed, but the systemic corruption he had upheld. Her phone buzzed with a message from Malik. Reed is more aware now. Be cautious. He'll try to manipulate perception next. Marissa smiled faintly, eyes narrowing with resolve. Let him try. The boardroom had been a stage. The audience was watching. And while Reed had attempted to control the narrative, the evidence she wielded and her unflinching resolve had shifted the balance. The sting had begun. The office lights were dim, the hum of the city outside barely audible through the thick glass windows. Marissa Ellis sat hunched over her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. The USB drive Officer Malik had handed her glowed faintly in the corner of her desk, a tangible promise of hidden truths. Every file, every email, every internal memo she uncovered felt like a breadcrumb on the trail to exposing Reed's carefully hidden misconduct. Her phone buzzed. A message from Julia Hammond. Be careful. He's starting to notice your moves. Don't let him see you dig too deep yet. Marissa's jaw tightened. She had expected resistance, but now it was escalating. Every move she made was being watched, calculated, and perhaps misrepresented. She opened the first folder from the drive. Emails between Reed and senior officers outlined patterns of protection. Complaints buried, investigations stalled, promotions granted to favored officers despite documented violations. Interesting, she murmured under her breath. Scrolling. Every timestamp, every thread of correspondence told a story. Reed wasn't just shielding officers. He was orchestrating it. The pattern spanned months, even years. The door creaked behind her. Malik appeared, his face tense. You're going deeper than I expected, he said quietly. This stuff, it's explosive. Reed's network is bigger than anyone admits. Some people will do anything to protect him. I know, Marissa said, her eyes not leaving the screen. But the city deserves transparency. The public deserves accountability. And he's been hiding behind authority for too long. Malik shifted, leaning closer. I just want you to be careful. These emails, they could ruin lives, yours included, if they get into wrong hands. I'll take precautions, she said firmly, but hiding the truth to protect myself isn't an option. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I don't envy you. Some of the officers you've exposed, they won't forgive. And Reed, he's more cunning than you realize. She saved the files to a secure folder, then pulled up a spreadsheet correlating complaints, responses, and outcomes. Patterns emerged with brutal clarity. Officers repeatedly shielded, internal investigations conveniently timed, Reed's initials on nearly every decision that altered the course of accountability. A subtle realization struck her. Reed had been manipulating more than just reports. He had been shaping perceptions, controlling information, and quietly discrediting anyone who threatened his authority. Her phone buzzed again. Anonymous message. Check the final folder. Emails labeled sensitive executive. Everything is there. Her pulse quickened. She opened the folder cautiously. Inside were more emails, internal meeting notes, and personal messages hinting at Reed's attempts to suppress complaints, mock black employees privately, and manipulate board decisions. The depth of his control was staggering. Malik leaned over her shoulder. This is worse than I thought. You have to be careful. He'll sense this breach. I'm aware, Marissa said, voice quiet but steel-edged. And that's why I need to be precise. One misstep, and he can spin this against me. But every document here is a step toward justice. They worked late into the night, mapping patterns, cross-referencing emails, and connecting the dots between complaints, promotions, and dismissals. Every revelation was a small victory, a breadcrumb closer to exposing systemic corruption. The hum of the air conditioner was punctuated by silence and soft keyboard clicks. Marissa leaned back, eyes scanning the mountain of evidence. The digital breadcrumbs were becoming a trail leading directly to Reed. She felt the weight of responsibility, but also a surge of determination. Suddenly, a notification popped on her screen. An internal memo accidentally sent from Reed's office to the wrong department. The subject line read, Audit Obstruction Plan. Marissa opened it carefully. Inside were directives to influence board members, delay reports, and discredit Marissa's work subtly. Malik exhaled sharply. He knows you're coming. He's planning retaliation. I expected that, Marissa said. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. He underestimated me before. Now he's learning the hard way. The office phone rang. Reed's name flashed across the screen. She ignored it. She knew exactly what it was. A test, a warning, a subtle attempt to intimidate her. She had faced veiled threats before. She would not be swayed. Malik straightened, brushing back his hair. You're going to be in the spotlight soon. This stuff, it can't stay hidden much longer. Are you ready for the fallout? Marissa exhaled slowly, eyes returning to the spreadsheets and emails. I didn't come this far to stop. He can't intimidate truth, and he can't control the evidence. When this comes out, it won't just be Reed. It'll be the system he's been protecting all along. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the office. Every digital breadcrumb she traced brought her closer to the reckoning, closer to public exposure, and closer to Reed's long-overdue accountability. Finally, she leaned back, stretching tired shoulders. The documents were ready, organized, and cross-referenced. The trail was clear. Reed's influence, carefully hidden for years, was now exposed in threads, emails, and memos. Her phone buzzed one last time. Another anonymous tip, short and direct. He's aware. Act cautiously. The confrontation is coming. Marissa's eyes narrowed. She knew Reed would act subtly, aggressively, any way he could. But she had prepared. She had allies. She had evidence. And she had resolve. The digital breadcrumbs had led her to the truth. Now, the confrontation was inevitable, and she would be ready. The city council chamber was packed, the air heavy with anticipation and tension. Marissa Ellis stepped to the podium, portfolio in hand, and felt the weight of every eye on her. Cameras lined the walls, recording every movement, every word. The public, journalists, board members, and even officers from the department were here. The room hummed with the electricity of expectation, justice and power converging in one confined space. Captain Daniel Reed sat at the front, flanked by his senior officers, posture rigid. His face was carefully neutral, but the subtle twitch at the corner of his eye betrayed unease. For years, he had wielded authority without accountability. Today, that authority would be tested under the unforgiving light of transparency. Marissa cleared her throat. "Thank you all for being here," she began, voice steady and authoritative. "Over the past months, I've conducted a comprehensive audit of internal complaints, personnel decisions, and patterns of oversight within the department. What I found is a systemic failure to uphold accountability, a failure that had protected certain officers at the expense of public trust." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Cameras flashed, microphones picked up the sharp clarity of her tone, and even Reed's composure wavered. One board member interjected. "Are you saying leadership, Captain Reed included, has been complicit?" Marissa held his gaze, unwavering. "Yes. Evidence shows repeated intervention in investigations, selective dismissals of complaints, and deliberate protection of certain officers. Emails, memos, and internal notes substantiate these claims." Whispers spread across the room. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. Reed's hand tightened on his pen, the faint tremor betraying the first crack in his carefully constructed armor. A reporter leaned forward. "Captain Reed, how do you respond to these allegations?" Reed exhaled, voice measured but strained. "The audit is flawed. Patterns can be interpreted in multiple ways. I have always acted in the best interest of the department and the public." Marissa interrupted calmly. "Interpretation cannot override documentation. The facts are clear. The system has enabled favoritism, dismissed complaints, and allowed misconduct to persist unchecked. Authority without accountability is not leadership. It is corruption." The chamber was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Then she pulled out a USB drive and connected it to projector. Emails, memos, and internal messages filled the screen. Names, dates, and timestamps appeared, revealing the depth of manipulation, protection, and interference. The evidence was irrefutable. Reed's face paled slightly. He cleared his throat, attempting a neutral tone. "This is selective. Context is missing." Marissa shook her head. "The context is consistent across every case. The pattern is undeniable. This is not about interpretation. This is about documented truth." One board member leaned forward. "Captain Reed, given the evidence, we will initiate a full independent investigation. Your actions will be reviewed and personnel decisions revisited. This is standard procedure." Reed's jaw tightened. He glanced at the officers around him, who shifted uncomfortably. The room was no longer under his control. Marissa had shifted the balance, and the public eye had pierced the shield of his authority. Marissa's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Every eye was on her, and she would not falter. She continued, "This is about more than one individual. It is about restoring integrity, trust, and accountability. Leadership is a responsibility, not a privilege. When authority is unearned, it crumbles under scrutiny." A reporter whispered to another, and murmurs spread. "She's right." Finally, someone is holding them accountable. The energy in the room shifted. Whispers became nods, nods became questions, and questions became demands for accountability. Reed stood abruptly. "Ms. Ellis, you may have documentation, but you are undermining morale, destabilizing the department, and eroding public confidence." Marissa's eyes met his. "I am restoring confidence, Captain. Public trust is fragile. It is earned, not assumed, and your unearned authority endangered it for too long." He opened his mouth, searching for a rebuttal, but found none that could counter the mounting evidence projected for all to see. His officers averted their eyes. Even his allies hesitated. The cracks were no longer hidden. They were illuminated. A board member spoke firmly. "Captain Reed, you will be suspended pending a full investigation. All actions and personnel decisions under your command are subject to review, effective immediately." The room erupted with quiet tension. Reed's control had slipped entirely. He sat down slowly, lips pressed tight, massive authority shattered in front of colleagues, public officials, and cameras. Marissa exhaled, tension leaving her body in a slow release. Justice was not instant gratification. It was accountability, systemic and deliberate. And tonight, the first public reckoning had begun. Later, as the chamber emptied, Julia Hammond approached Marissa quietly. "You did it," she said, voice low but full of awe. "You held them accountable." Marissa shook her head slightly, her gaze still fixed on the fading glow of the projector. "We did it. The evidence speaks. But this isn't the end. There's still work to do. Policy reform, cultural change, systemic accountability. And Reed, he'll resist quietly or overtly. But the momentum is ours now." Malik appeared at the doorway, giving her a small, approving nod. "You've shifted the balance. People are paying attention now. That alone changes everything." Marissa allowed herself a small, weary smile. It's not about revenge. It's about truth. And the truth cannot be hidden forever. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution that had occurred within the chamber. But for those paying attention, the journalists, the citizens, and those brave enough to demand justice, the message was clear. Unearned authority had been exposed, and accountability was no longer optional. Marissa packed her portfolio carefully, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders once more. The public reckoning had begun, but the fight for true systemic reform had just started, and she would not stop until every hidden thread of injustice had been illuminated. The news cycle moved fast, but the story refused to disappear. Marissa Ellis watched the morning broadcast from her kitchen, the television muted, captions scrolling across the screen. City launches full review of police leadership. A photo of Captain Daniel Reed appeared. Older than she remembered, eyes hollow, confidence replaced by something brittle. She wrapped her hands around a mug she hadn't touched. Sleep had come in fragments. Justice, she was learning, did not arrive cleanly. It arrived heavy. Her phone buzzed. Julia Hammond's name. "They made it official," Julia said without preamble. "Reed's suspension is now indefinite. The independent prosecutor is taking over. They're reopening 18 cases." 18, Marissa. Marissa closed her eyes. "That's more than I expected." "It's more than he expected, too," Julia replied. "His allies are quiet, very quiet." Silence, Marissa had learned, was its own confession. At the oversight office later that day, the atmosphere felt altered. Doors opened faster. Emails were answered promptly. People who had once avoided eye contact now nodded, cautious but respectful. One analyst stopped her near the copier. "Ms. Ellis, Marissa, I just want to say thank you. My brother filed a complaint 3 years ago. It went nowhere." Marissa swallowed. "I'm sorry it took this long." The woman shook her head. "You made it matter." That word stayed with her, matter, long after conversation ended. In a closed-door review session, Marissa sat with the reform committee as they outlined next steps. "We're restructuring internal investigations," a council attorney said. "Independent intake. Civilian oversight with subpoena power." A board member added, "We're also revising leadership hiring authority." Marissa looked up. "Revising how?" The attorney hesitated, then smiled thinly. "The city will no longer promote or appoint police chiefs internally. Final hiring authority will sit with an external compliance panel." Julia glanced at Marissa, eyes sharp. "You mean," Marissa said slowly, "a panel like ours?" "Exactly," the attorney replied. "You'll help decide who leads the department." The irony landed quietly, almost painfully. Later, in the parking garage, Marissa crossed paths with Officer Malik Thompson. He looked tired, but lighter. "They reassigned 3 supervisors this morning," he said, "and they asked for my testimony." Voluntarily. She nodded. "Are you okay with that?" He let out a breath. I'm finally not afraid." That night, another headline surfaced online. This one smaller, buried beneath the main story. "Former captain seeks legal counsel." Marissa didn't click it. She didn't need to. A week later, she saw Reed again. Not in uniform. Not in command. He stood in the hallway outside a hearing room. Suit rumpled, shoulders slumped. When he noticed her, his expression shifted. Defensiveness flickering, then resignation. "So," he said quietly, "you won." Marissa stopped a few feet away. This wasn't about winning. He scoffed softly. You dismantle my career. No, she replied. Your choices did. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. Then his gaze dropped. I thought you were dangerous, he muttered. Overqualified. Out of place. She met his eyes. You thought authority belonged to you. That's why this happened. Security called his name. Reed turned away without another word. There was no triumph in watching him leave, only a dull ache where something heavier had passed through. That evening, Marissa sat alone in her office, the city lights blinking beyond the window. She reviewed the final draft of the reform recommendations, her name typed neatly at the top. Her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. My complaint was reopened today. Thank you for not looking away. Marissa leaned back, eyes stinging. Justice had cost her sleep, peace, a measure of innocence. But it had also given something back: truth, accountability, momentum. She closed her laptop. Tomorrow, she would help interview candidates for the city's next police chief. Tomorrow, she would sit at the table Reed once believed she didn't belong at. And tomorrow, the system would still be imperfect, still resistant, still flawed, but no longer untouched. Marissa picked up her coat and turned off the light. The aftermath wasn't quiet, but accountability had finally arrived, and it was staying. The city did not feel healed. It felt altered, like a building after an earthquake, still standing, but with hairline cracks visible if you knew where to look. Marissa Ellis stood at the bus stop on Jefferson Avenue, coat pulled tight, watching people move past her. Some recognized her now. A few nodded. One man whispered her name to another like it was something fragile. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Her phone buzzed. You're late, Julia Hammond said when Marissa answered. Traffic, Marissa replied. And I needed to walk. Julia understood. She always did. The committee's ready. They want your input before final interviews. Marissa exhaled. I'll be there. At City Hall, the conference room looked different than it once had. The same long table, the same flags, but the air felt heavier, more deliberate. 3 candidates' folders lay open. A council member cleared his throat. We've never done this with civilian oversight at this level. Marissa met his gaze. That's why it matters. There was no argument, only careful nods. When the meeting ended, Marissa lingered. She always did now. Walking away too quickly felt wrong, like leaving something unfinished. In the hallway, she overheard 2 junior staffers talking. They say complaints are up, one said. Yeah, the other replied, but they're actually being processed. That was progress. Ugly, necessary progress. That evening, Marissa visited her mother. They sat at the small kitchen table, the same one Marissa had studied at as a child. You look tired, her mother said gently. I am. You proud? Marissa hesitated. I don't know if that's the word. Her mother reached across the table, squeezing her hand. You always did carry heavy things. Later, alone in her apartment, Marissa scrolled through messages she'd never answered. Some were kind, some were cruel. One read simply, why did you have to make it about race? She closed the app, because it already was, she thought, long before she arrived. Sleep came slowly. Dreams came faster. She dreamed of hallways without doors, of voices behind glass, of files stacking endlessly. She woke before dawn, heart racing. Trauma didn't vanish just because accountability arrived. It lingered. It learned new shapes. Weeks passed. Reed was formally charged, not with racism, not with cruelty, but with obstruction, abuse of authority, and misconduct. The language was clinical. The consequences were real. Marissa did not attend the hearing. She spent that day at a community forum instead, listening to residents speak. An older man stepped to the microphone. I didn't trust any of you, he said bluntly. Still don't, but I saw what happened, and that counts. A young woman spoke next, voice shaking. I filed my first complaint today. I was scared, but someone told me it wouldn't disappear anymore. Marissa wrote that down. It wouldn't disappear anymore. One afternoon, Malik stopped by her office. They offered me a position, he said. Training and accountability liaison. That's good, Marissa said. He nodded. I almost said no. But you didn't. No, he said quietly. Because walking away doesn't change what stays. After he left, Marissa stared out the window for a long time. She thought about what had been lost. Reputation, safety, simplicity. She thought about what had been gained. Truth, structure. A door cracked open where a wall once stood. Neither list was clean. On her desk sat a small stack of unopened mail. One envelope stood out, handwritten. Inside was a short note. I'm starting law school. I saw you testify. Thank you for making space. Marissa folded it carefully and placed it in her drawer. Not everything needed a response. Some things just needed to be carried forward. On the anniversary of the investigation's launch, Marissa returned to the steps outside City Hall. There was no press, no crowd, just stone, sky, and the low hum of traffic. She remembered the days she first been told she was overqualified, how small they'd tried to make her feel, how wrong they'd been. The system wasn't fixed, but it had been interrupted. And sometimes interruption was the beginning of change. Marissa turned and walked back inside. There was still work to do.